G'day legends, happy Sunday. I hope you are having a fantastic day. I hope you've had a great weekend and the Sunday blues haven't got you too bad. Now legends, I didn't think I was going to be able to make a video today, but I'm actually feeling better today than I did yesterday. But of course, we still have a number of days to go and of course the dose increasing and more saturation of our body throughout. So there will be some time off. But legends, of course, as always, we do have a lot to go. We're going to look at a US exemption around tariffs and sanctions for Hungary to do with Russia and energy. We're going to, of course, have a deep dive in Pokrovsk. We need to look at the maps there. We need to look at some large claims around surrendering of forces also. And of course, where Ukraine's making ground back on the north, but Russia continue to squeeze on that choke point. The main meat of this video today, though, is going to be about bridges and strategic strikes. Now, if you watch my channel, you know that I don't just cover every single strategic strike, because what I say is this is just a force multiplier, but again, this is still a ground war that will be won or lost in the sector on the ground. But we do look at when we see something new enter the battlefield or an overall tactic and objective. Now, what a lot of people ask is, well, we see a lot of power plants hit, but why is there not a concerted effort to take down the bridges across the Dnieper River, basically splitting Ukraine into east and west? We're going to look at that today, and we're going to talk about why this is to do with Russia's overall objectives, their stated objectives, and why taking down those bridges may not actually work into that at this point in time, although it would, of course, have chaos for Ukrainian logistics. And of course, we'll look at the maps in other sectors as well. So a lot to go over. Let's just start here with this. Now, a lot of media is reporting that there's been a 1-year exemption granted from the US to Hungary around the sanctioned Russian oil and gas. Now, the foreign minister here says fake news. Those who wrote this were not in the room. The exemption is permanent for an indefinite period. This is after the Orban-Trump meeting that we reported on yesterday. And this is one of the things with these sanctions and tariffs and all of this that we see is a lot of the sanctions, there are so many exemptions. This is why they don't hit as hard. If it impacts this company or country, you see exemptions go through. And of course, these sanctions, these are just another force multiplier tool in the basket. When we talk about war like this, it first and foremost is infantry, movements on the ground, positioning on the ground. Everything else is in that holistic, concerted effort from the very infantrymen to then the politicians. And it needs to be a link between all of this. Okay, let's look at the maps and let's talk about Pokrovsk. Of course, here we have Ukraine in the center of your screen, capital of Kyiv. Red areas, occupied since 22. Purple since 14. The red check, of course, this is ground made by Russia in the past 24 hours. Blue check would be the other way. We don't see any of that today. This is, of course, the Dnieper River running down, splitting, of course, east and west of Ukraine. That'll be relevant in a sec. Let's come down into Pokrovsk actual. We do see just a little bit of red check around Moskovsky in here. Of course, grey zone heading all through Pokrovsk, but from Ukrainian soldiers on the ground a week ago saying that the grey here should be shown as red and that this situation in here is critical. It is catastrophic. Let's look at what Suryak and AMK are saying. Suryak. Situation, Myrnohrad, Pokrovsk front. Russian army took complete control over the Dinas district. So that is the district in yesterday's thumbnail, but also in yesterday's video that we did report was likely completely surrounded, physically surrounded by the Russian forces. And he is saying that the Russians have taken complete control over this and that 95% of Pokrovsk is under control. But the remaining 5% isn't under Ukrainian control. That is in grey zone. He says further south that Russian forces took over the first trench systems of Lysivkia. Remember Lysivkia down in here? AMK yesterday, or maybe the day prior, said that Lysivkia had come under full Russian control. Again, what we're looking for here is to present different maps to you and see what overlap we get. Okay, let's look at Pokrovsk. You can see Danivska area coming under control on the northeastern part of Pokrovsk. You can also see down around Lysivkia, down in the northeast of Myrnohrad too. Look at this arrow there heading down towards the pig farms in the direction of Hereshny as well. We will talk about that. The impossibility of land supplies to Ukrainian forces besieged in Myrnohrad. So recon groups coming not only on the choke point down in here, but down this road here towards the pig farms. And this is what we spoke about yesterday. Is it's one thing having a few kilometre choke point like this, but if you start moving down this road in this way, it creates this, what was a narrow but short choke point, into a narrow but lengthy choke point, because we know the Russians are up to here in Hereshny, and you could end up with some level of almost like tunnel like this. Of course, to force anything in or out of here becomes very, very difficult. And of course, with that difficulty, becomes incredibly costly. It is in this city where there is still great resistance by the besieged despite their ammunition. However, their defences are becoming weaker. So, of course, Myrnohrad area is, of course, besieged at the moment, but of course, still fighting a hell of a lot. Why? Because what other option do you have other than surrendering? And at this point in the war, sticking your hands up is very, very difficult. In this district, the Russians have taken the high-rise building as an 8th district and reaching the former boarding school. So moving across in Myrnohrad. Also, let's look at then Mr. AMK mapping. Again, you can see to the north of Svitli or Rivne in here, this lengthening of this pocket also, as well as that the Danis district coming under control, further movement to Rivne also. But he doesn't show the amount of movement down the pig farms or that some of the DRGs may be. There's a little bit of talk about how effective actually is the push down there. But you can see the grey zone moving out in that direction. So over the last 24 hours, any remaining soldiers in the Dinas district of northeastern Pokrovsk surrendered after being physically encircled earlier. Now, this is still a claim. I haven't seen footage supporting this yet. Again, we will wait and see. Attacks are now being carried out further east of Rivne. So, of course, you have Rivne in here and further to the east side as well. So you can see the movement then across in here. Now, northwest of Myrnohrad, Russian forces have levelled the front line east. So, of course, we're talking northwest. This levelling out. This is what we've spoken about. This levelling out, you can see where the grey zone is. This creates that choke point becoming almost like a tube through. Fierce fighting continues in Ryanske with no new confirmed changes. Of course, we see Ryanske here, the Russians on the north and south, Ukraine in the centre, but we do see there's a shitload of fires, both Russian and Ukrainian into here, just burning it to the ground because they know how important this is. With these new changes for the first time, not a single part of Pokrovsk city is under Ukrainian control. 95% is under Russian control, with the rest in a fluid grey zone. From what I'm seeing and reading, that appears to be the case in Pokrovsk itself. Now, I can't not mention this. There are some Ukrainian accounts, the typical ones at the moment, that are saying Ukraine had a very successful counterattack through Ryanske and has completely cleared this whole area and has unblocked Myrnohrad. What I'll say is there's no footage supporting this at the moment, or reliable mappers that I typically use, or deep state map. But again, it is worth mentioning. Now let's look on the northern side. Of course, we see where Russia once pushed up through Zoloty Kolodiaz, this has mostly been pushed back, and a lot of combat actions happening up here. And this is the Dobropilia section. That the Ukrainian forces have eliminated most of the Kushriv Yar salient. In the north, Russian forces advanced from Ukrainian forces, advanced from positions south and east of Kushriv Yar and recaptured positions in the tree lines. They reached forest way to western Shakhovka, where it's now then accumulating forces. So from Kushriv Yar to the western outskirts of Shakhov. Of course, you can see if we come down in here where this has pushed out. This is, of course, Kushriv Yar. This then is Shakhovka, western, northwestern outskirts, pushing back down to Nikhorovka in this sector as well. So showing fairly similar, but not showing the disconnect that we have seen prior. Ukrainian forces advanced positions Novoshakovka. They pushed along the parallel gullies, moving down to the southwest. Despite Russian FAB bombings, the glide bombs, Ukrainian assault groups made more progress towards the Krasny Toretsk River. So, of course, down in this sector in here. But, of course, there is rolling FABs to try and eliminate these actions further forward too. On the other hand, after their withdrawal from northern Pankivka, Russian forces re-entered the forest in the grey zone northwest of the village. So Pankivka have re-entered somewhat down in here. This salient is being closed up. Does this then mean we're going to see a push through like this? In my opinion, no. This was held quickly, what means it can fall quickly. This has been held for a long time. Typically means you're going to face a lot more resistance. But it doesn't show that, and this has been over a number of weeks and months also. But it is worth absolutely keeping an eye on what is then unfolding in this sector. Now, when we zoom right out on the maps, we see, of course, Ukraine is basically split in two by a large river. And if we zoom in more, we come to then Kremenchuk. We come into Kremenchuk and we have a number of bridges, notably this one across the Dnieper, another one here as well. But of course, you've got a number of bridges across the Dnieper River. I believe it's like 17 Some of those are exclusively rail, others are exclusively car, and some are dams also. And many have questioned, why are these not being taken out with the aerial superiority that we have seen Russia have with aerial missiles and drones? Now, when I say aerial superiority, this does not mean that they have air superiority and you've got fighter aircraft flying over every part of the country. No, but what it does mean is using a number of Iskanders, a number of Kinzhals, a number of Kalibrs, a number of drones, basically anywhere that they want to hit, they can hit at the moment. Of course, there is interceptions. Of course, there is misses. But again, you can hit it. And last night, we saw another massive air attack by Russia. Now, if you only watch my channel, which is a problem, you should be taking in different sources. So please go and watch others. But this is not uncommon to see large aerial attacks like this. From what the numbers that I'm seeing is 21 Iskander M's, 13 Iskander K's, 10 Kinzhals, 3 Kaliber missiles, and around 450 drones. Now, these missiles, these ran out actually in March 2022, so these are actually just the ghost of Moscow. But these systems, these have again targeted Ukraine's energy sectors and left many huge areas without power. Centrenergo, they reported that their power units have completely gone offline and that 3 thermal power plants have stopped generating electricity, and the situation, they say, is critical. Of course, looking to fix it at the moment. And what I will say is the Ukrainian electrical engineers and line workers have been unbelievable in being actually able to reconnect power very quickly now for years. But as well, this is getting worse and worse and worse every strike, leading to more darkness, more cold, heading into winter. One thing in this war is we have not had a severe winter yet. Maybe this will be the year. But Ukraine is in a bit of a rock and a hard place with these strikes. Now, an energy aerial truce, this is something that we have seen before. So you don't strike power plants, you don't strike oil refineries, gas facilities, etc. And it may be something that Russia would consider. Where Ukraine's in a rock and a hard place is it's also the only sector in which Ukraine is actually seeing some success in the refinery strikes, in the gas strikes. This is the problem. If you sign an aerial truce, well, the whole plan of inflicting so much cost on these Russian facilities that Putin will come to the table and stick his hands up and throw himself in a set of handcuffs, that is then gone. So this is that rock and a hard place that it is currently in. Now, if there is an energy truce, but not a strategic aerial truce, which I don't think we'd see because then Russia is just completely dominant in that sector, what we could see is Russia go after the Dnieper bridges and cut Ukraine in an east and west. And many have been like, why haven't they done this? Because this would complicate Ukraine's logistics into the east so much. It would be so much easier to pull forward. Well, I'm going to show you a strike that we have seen and a write-up from an analyst behind the scenes specifically about this. Now, I showed you down in Kremenchuk. I show you this on purpose. On September the 7th, it was reported for the first time in the war, Russian Geran drones have struck a Ukrainian bridge across the Dnieper River. Of course, Gerans, those long-range analog of, the first ones were an analog of an Iranian Shahed. Then the new ones, they have increased in lethality, range, height, etc. But Geran struck this bridge right here. You may be familiar with this bridge. I showed the images because it was a big moment at the time. Now, it didn't do any absolutely severe damage, and I can't find it, but I believe in the days following there was a video of cars then moving back across this bridge. You can see that this is a lifter bridge for boats to go. Then underneath, you can see on the top superstructure and the bottom as well. I've tried to find some older images. You can get an idea. It doesn't really show it here where that strike was. And you can see a better image of where this strike is as well. What I will say is you can see from a bridge like this is a very sturdy, chody bridge compared to some others that may be more easy to take down. Okay, why is this important? Well, let's go over this. From someone behind the scenes who helps me a lot, and mate, thank you very much. Every time I'm very unwell, you come through and you help me out, and it makes my day so much easier and shorter. So, as promised, although very late, here are some thoughts about bridges. First, I think it's useful to take a look at the last significant attack on a bridge, the one from September on the Kurukov or Kremenchuk bridge. It's an old steel vertical lift bridge made up of multiple short spans. The main one is at just 82 metres long. Since it needs to lift itself up, it is also very thick and sturdy. It also happens to be the part the Russians chose to hit multiple times right in the middle, as per these images here. Now, at the time, sources reported that almost all of the hits were Garans, perhaps about a dozen. The Russians make hundreds of Garans per day. So this also proves they could destroy or at least break a bridge if they wanted to. So it was only a few that hit, but again, if you really wanted and you fire 100 or 150 or 200 at this, you're very likely going to bring this down. So why was this not the case? Interestingly, they chose to hit the main span, knowing that it's the thickest and sturdiest one. Normally, when you damage the middle of a span, there's significant risk of collapse because each half span rests not only on its support, but also on the other half span, so where the bridge is spanning across. But this one is so thick that it can take a lot of punishment without collapsing. Perhaps the Russians chose to hit it because they expected the lift mechanism to be tricky and costly to repair. Or maybe they knew they could hit it multiple times to make a point without risking to actually destroy it. So we're hitting somewhere very sturdy to send a message more so than actually taking it down. This is hard to say. What the point was supposed to be exactly is I don't know. Perhaps if Ukraine gets tomahawks to strike critical infrastructure on Russian soil, remember, there are targets in Ukraine we've chosen not to hit yet, but we could change our minds. And this is something we've spoken about on the escalation ladder for Russia, is the bridges across the Dnieper. And of course, this could be signalling around tomahawks. It was around that time we started hearing that conversation pop up again. There's lots of reasons for it. Why then was it only a dozen when we do know it could have been 100 if needed? But again, what is clear is they, the Russians, do have the capability to at least sever bridges. So they chose not to. Why? I think it's helpful to take a step back and remember Russia's stated war goals. The main one boils down to the same thing: neutralizing Ukraine. Attritional war is to destroy your opponent's potential. That is what we speak about in this. Attritional war, yes, it has goals of territory, of this, of that, of whatever, but primarily is to reduce potential of your enemy, and therefore, by reducing potential, you will gain territory if you'd like, you'll gain political influence if you'd like, and a whole bunch of other sectors. But that is objective number one. Neutralizing Ukraine. No joining NATO, no foreign troops, no missiles in Ukraine, no powerful Ukrainian armed forces, no political power or weapons for Ukrainian nationalists. All of this is about removing Ukraine as a potential danger to Russia. Whether one thinks it ever was or ever could have been is beside the point. What matters is that Russia believes. So again, ideologically how you feel about this, whether they could or couldn't, that's out of the point. You need to go, this is the stated goal, is to not have NATO, no foreign troops, weaken the country, okay? We know that. You could even argue that securing the 4 oblasts is about making sure Ukraine can never try anything in Crimea, more so than just taking those areas, creating that buffer on it, okay? I think my audience will understand this. Given this, what does destroying the bridges actually achieve across the Dnieper? Sure, Ukraine might be forced to withdraw west of the Dnieper, but then what? It would still have most of its military. It would still want to join NATO and host NATO troops and weapons on its soil for protection. Azov and co. would still be around, and they'll still be clamouring for 1991 borders. The Russians would have their 4 oblasts, except for the bits west of the river, and then some shore. But that's it. Their main objectives would not be met. So if you fall back here and you can't then cross over this as well, your main objectives of then destroying potential are then not met. And it would actually, I believe, if this was severed physically, it would then have more incentive for potentially Western troops to go in and increase the size of the armed forces for Ukraine on this sector as well. So you need to look at this as well as sort of longer art of attrition and war also. So we've read that one. Apologies. Last one. To meet the goals, they must destroy the Ukrainian military and force Kyiv to capitulate to Russia's demands. To do this, they must be able to actually meet the Ukrainian military in battle. From Moscow's point of view, it's probably convenient that Kyiv keeps sending more and more troops east, where the Russians can fight them with decent logistics. If Ukraine retreated behind the river, Russian forces might have to cross it, which would be very hard, especially without any bridges. The other option would be to go through Belarus, which Lukashenko did let them do in 2022. Lukashenko was in a wood chopping competition today, I believe. But I think this was with the understanding that it would not last long. It would only be over a few days. Putin could probably force him to accept anyway, but there would be a political and diplomatic cost. Besides, the border areas between Ukraine and Belarus are mostly forests, which haven't really been favourable terrain for Russia in this war. We do speak about this close terrain of forest, like in the Kremenar forest, where Ukraine can have an advantage or parity. Additionally, the front line would be much more shorter than it is now, which would also help Ukraine, the smaller force. Brusilov offensive across a relatively short and heavily forested front line doesn't sound great. So what he's getting at here is, instead of having a front line like this here, is if you only have a front line that's maybe something like this, a lot shorter, forested area. Remember, Brusilov offensive action, you want to push in multiple. If you're the numerically superior force, you want to push on multiple sectors at the same time, from Sumy to Vovchansk down to Stepnohursk, therefore force a very slow collapse to occur, because your enemy, your opponent, can't then stabilize in one sector without letting another one go to shit. Finally, there aren't many Russian speakers to liberate in Western Ukraine, so it would be politically awkward. While the Donbass civilians occasionally help the Russians by giving away Ukrainian positions, the opposite would now happen. You need to remember too that a lot of these forces that we don't hear about much anymore, but in Donetsk and Luhansk, were troops who volunteered from there also. And we do know, and from first-hand experience myself, from Bakhmut down to Kyiv, all the way through to northern Kharkiv, it's a real concern with some of the civilians who are remaining there. In summary, I think it's more advantageous for Russia to draw Ukrainian forces east and destroy them there for their overall goal of destroying the potential of Ukraine. I think that's a really good breakdown of why we might not be seeing these bridges going down. But if we do see a situation grow more desperate, that is what we then could see. But again, we don't know where this war is going to go. And if this war could be fought to its conclusion and we did see a steamroller, don't think that eventually, if this actually falls off a cliff and does start rolling through, don't think it could only be Russia who then takes down the bridges. Okay? We don't know where this war is going to go. Now, let's move into the maps. We have a little bit of red check. We'll get back to that. Let's talk about Velika Novosilka. Let's look on the northern front, Ivanivka, Filia, and of course, Novopavlivka. We did see movement around Dashnay on the deep state map the other day, so we can definitely confirm there was some movement there. Let's look on deep state map. Situation on this front. During last week, Russia made small advances in the northern part of Novopavlivka. So northern part right in here, making ground in that direction, out from Filia, Dashnay as well. These maps showing very different. Ukrainian forces infiltrated the western part of the locality to trying to consolidate positions there in Ivanivka as well. So Ivanivka, which still isn't shown as grey zone, that Ukraine had pushed back into the northern sectors of that. Let's have a look at Mr. AMK mapping. Again, showing that on the southern side with the northern push, the Russians are breaking into Novopavlivka as well. This is just to the east of Ivanivka, making ground further out from Dashnay as well, and further out from Kotoranivka, also across then the international border that is sitting here. So he's showing a bit more, but squeezing down now on Novopavlivka. These two maps are fairly similar. Let's then move our way down onto the west the west of Velika, or the Huliapol area, where we do see a lot of grey zone being served up on a platter. Let's look at this. So, situation, Huliapol front, Russian army took full control over Uspanivka. DRGs began advancing at the beginning of November to surround Nove and Novu Spenivske as well. So, let's have a look. We know Uspanivka, I didn't show you, but there's many flags going up through Uspanivka. That has come under control, but DRG is heading to Nove and Novospenivske as well. So you can see the grey zone in this sector. I don't think we've seen just a small bit of grey zone shifting beyond Uspanivka there. That is the Suryak maps. Then we'll come on to the Suryak map. You can see same Nove, Novuleksindrivka, as well as Solodoke as well, where he says the Russian forces are making ground, as well as just above near then Pershotrev Neve as well. So showing this as red zone increasing control up to 31 kilometre squares. DRGs entering then Oleksivkia, but I wanted to look at this northern advance. Further south, no, Malinivkia, Orestropil as well. So DRGs entering this Orestropil. Let me find this. So this is it. Remember, there's grey zones showing this. I don't know when that grey zone actually showed up in that point. So on the 6th to the 7th or the 5th to the 6th, we see this grey zone into Orestropil. This, of course, being shown by Mr. AMK today. I missed that grey zone movement. So if we go from the base to here, we're talking some 6.7 kilometres behind the line, or maybe some at minimum 4.71. And this is what we are seeing. And this should be the concern of this front. Is it is commonplace, unlike anywhere else, it's commonplace to have advances of 3, 4, 5 kilometres day after day, showing grey on this, because it probably should be some grey because of the porosity of this, of the nature of this. But again, this sweep that is happening, the linear warfare bros having a Brittany 2010 meltdown. Well, they're not, because they don't realise how their own maths works, because the linear warfare bros 6 months ago were saying 1,000 years, now they're saying 150 years. Fuck me. But you can see the porosity here should have more grey, but also how this is getting then out around the fortifications. Now, if you were to ask me, where could we see the most amount of kilometre squares? This is why Deep State showed 200, AMK and Syriac and everyone else showed 400 to 600 last month, was because of the grey zone compared to the red in here. Okay, so we've showed you all of Velika. We just have a few more maps to go over. We turn this on. We come up into Konstantinivka. We can see red into Pleshchivka. Again, I think it's unlikely that this Kilian-Bukhatarivka pocket is still there. If it is, it was catastrophic months ago, and it's going to be worse again. Let's have a look. Syriac maps completely have cleared the warehouses of Ivanopilia and have then started combats in the same direction in here, but all of this here says coming under control. Let's have a look. AMK mapping, breaking into Konstantinivka, as well as movement down Ivanopilia, but also on the western side of this river here, out from Yambalinivka, reaching that physically encircled and getting on the northern side. See how AMK he also shows this as red? I think that is most likely. Now, again, there are Ukrainian pages saying that there are attempts on the outskirts of Konstantinivka, but that is very costly, which wouldn't surprise me with the actual break-in being very, very difficult. Let's look at this. After weeks of DRG infiltrations, they began to consolidate in the eastern parts of the city. Again, if you'd like to know how the Russians take an area like this, like Osheretne, like Avdiivka, like Pokrovsk, like Myrnohrad, like we're seeing Konstantinivka, press on my profile. Video is like the main video on my channel about how the Russian DRGs are working with the drones and then heavy artillery to do this. Let's move our way up. We have, of course, the Terny area. We have the Borisivka and Drivka front line, somewhere I'm not really concerned about. A little bit of ground being made in here. It's not that I'm unappreciative of the update to this. I just think eventually this whole area in here is going to then come under control with the movement towards Liman. Then we come to then Kupiansk. We have then Syriac saying this situation. Northeast front over the past 6 days, Russia made significant advances on the northeastern districts of Kupiansk city. Russian forces took complete control over these districts in here and have advanced slightly. 60% is now under control. So we'll try and see where we can line this up. So right out into, so you can get this building, these buildings right here, is this. So somewhat dirty, rough, the way you like it, looking something like this in here. As we do know, though, Ukraine has had success through Moskovska and into Sobolivkia as well. So we did see movement back in here. But again, what we've said is this is split by the Oskil. It's going to be very difficult to move much back out across here. We have seen for months Russia's taking the bridges down between, if I zoom out, you get a better idea, taking the bridges down between Senkove and Kupiansk, and we did speak at least 9 months ago about heavy equipment on here, if this is then vertically enveloped. I think once we see the Pokrovsk area fall and then settle, this might be where Rubicon go next between here. I think this would be my prediction, is if you get those Rubicon elements somewhat in the Senkove, Borosivki area, they come out from here and are able to have some level of what is considerate vertical envelopment, even if it's somewhat like a parallel envelopment from here and as well across then the Oskil. And you could see this flatten quickly. Again, we will see, because what this does do is it shortens the front line, which sounds great, but for Russia at this point in time, lengthening the front line actually can work to their advantage too, because you are numerically superior. This is why Kursk extending the front line by 1,200 square kilometres. I don't know how long the front line would be, significantly longer than that. That's why I said if you're the numerically inferior force, you don't want to extend the front line, just as basics 101. Legends, we got through that. Have a fantastic day. If I don't see you for a couple of days, look after yourselves, and I'll catch up on everything when I'm back. I do think it is likely I'm going to miss some very large updates around this area. But again, areas will hold a lot longer than you think is humanly possible. Mariupol, Avdiivka, Bakhmut, clear examples of this. Legends, I'll speak to you in the next few days. Thank you. Bye-bye.